Welcome to Green Disruptors, Scaling the Future, a podcast where we dive into the innovations transforming clean energy and the real business challenges of making sustainability scalable. From breakthrough technologies to the tough decisions behind growth, we explore what it takes to build a greener future at scale. I'm your host, Megan Kjar, and my mission is to help green tech companies tell stories that matter. This podcast is brought to you by Mountaintop Social Marketing. Okay, everybody, welcome back to Green Disruptors. I'm excited to have Abdullah on with me today. He is the CEO and founder of Arbor, and I just want to start by first welcoming you. Hi.
Thanks for having me, Megan.
Yeah, and then go ahead and tell us, you've got a really interesting background, so give us a little detail into who you are and how you've arrived at this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in Pakistan, so grew up in a small manufacturing town in Pakistan, left when I was 16, so I've studied in UK, US, and Canada since then. Just kind of like the first person to go abroad, as well as the first person to actually pursue education.
So is your family still back in Pakistan?
Yes, most of them are. My siblings have just started college here in Canada now, so they've started on the same path as I did, but yeah, I left quite a while ago.
Well, you were the leader. Someone's got to start.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm the eldest in my family, so I had a head start.
Oh, same. Yeah. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, so I graduated from the US, from Kansas State in 2017, and then I applied for a research scholarship here at University of Calgary, and I was very passionate about how the world's global climate change issues are, because growing up in Pakistan, I mean the location is in Indus Valley, so there were severe droughts and there's a lot of climate change effects in that area, and then also I kind of thought that if there were more utilities available to the people there, the economy would also be productive. So I was researching something along building energy modeling without having to rely on the energy grid to keep a building cool. And I just thought if the building was cooler, people would be calmer, and then there'd be a lot more productivity in the environment. And during my research, I met my other co-founders, just hanging out in a university bubbles. And I was always complaining about how bad the quality of data was in a lot of these softwares that I was using to kind of, draw my analysis or push a new idea out, because I couldn't trust the quality of data. And then the more we dove deep into it, the more I talked to them about these problems, we realized that businesses who have such a huge footprint on the world, the tools that they have available today are just merely spreadsheets and reports and a lot of what I would call 20th century technology. Well,
no, it's true. Yeah.
And what we wanted to do was just, instead of the best research and technology going to, machine learning or, a sales software, we just wanted to build something in sustainability and kind of use technology of today to tackle some of the world's most challenging climate change issues.
So apart from 20th century reporting and unreliable data, why is it so hard to track your carbon footprint as a business?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's a pretty large topic. I think if the factories and the farms were still here in North America or in the first world countries, it would be a lot easier to tackle carbon emissions, because you could see them
in the same place.
Yeah, you could see them, you could understand what goes into them. But what I've seen from our firsthand while working with all these businesses is that somewhere in the last 20, 30 years, the businesses were run in a boardroom instead of on the factory floor. And what that essentially did was it exported all these carbon emission intensive activities to other countries where there was some sort of cost advantage. And what that did, in fact, was that there's this disconnect. It's like a telephone game where, the people who make the decisions on how products should be, how they should be marketed, how they should be sold, how they should be designed, don't really have a good connection with the people who make them, who grow the materials that are used in those products. And it's just kind of created this two-sided world where those people, when they're producing for the local market, they get very creative and very efficient with using, lower carbon activities to do stuff in the local market. But when they get requests from a top brand, those brands have already identified that I need this virgin material, I need this machinery to produce this product, and that limits that manufacturer's or producer's ability to provide lower carbon footprint. So
they're like locally, they have a lot of strategies that they're already using. But if you gave me the example of Levi's coming in and saying, we only want this fabric, and they're like, okay, you're the one giving us the money, we'll do it.
Exactly, right? So when, let's say, any brand, like just using an example, like H&M decides to put something out there, their product designers have already identified that this product is going to have polyester, this product is going to have these protocols in terms of quality assurance, and that's what the manufacturers bid on. And when they've won the bid, when they've manufactured the product, a couple years later, that company would come in asking, hey, what are your factory emissions? And then it just kind of creates
but
this.
That was never part of the initial discussion and agreement.
Exactly. And when I've met with these CEOs, and I talked with a few of them where they were exporting like $500 million worth of like goods out of their factories to these first world countries, they always were like, hey, if I could just make a case on their behalf to negotiate dollars and CO2 at the same time, the whole transition of a lower carbon footprint economy is a lot more feasible and it's a lot more doable in the short term. But it's just kind of like this disconnect that exists between supply chains because of their global nature.
So are you doing something about that particular problem with Arbor?
So what we did was we decided to create some sort of novel technology that would allow the suppliers, the manufacturers, and the raw material providers to be on the same page as these companies are over here. Instead of using some sort of accounting mechanism at the end of the year, just like how we do our business books, we wanted to take a little bit of a more novel approach so that you can take data-driven decisions in your forecast, in your everyday thinking. So what Arbor is essentially is a bottom-up supply chain modeling software where you can model any product or asset's supply chain journey. Along the way, you can then use that data to create scenarios with different suppliers, with different materials, with one of the factories on how they're reducing waste, and kind of include that as part of the journey of each product. Now, a lot of the times this might not be happening on the ground, but you could still simulate what that could do to your company's supply chain and then act accordingly.
So does this work better for companies that aren't well established yet? I imagine if you haven't started, then nothing needs to be undone to fix the problem. Like, is there a way, if somebody's already really established, to still have that work?
So it's pretty rare somebody's done some work in their supply chains. Like, I think since sustainability regulations been around, almost all of the budget goes to a sustainability report. None of it goes to the business's actual supply chain. So most people, I would say, are not in that use case that they have done something that they really want to make sure that they can account for. That being said, there is good intent in the space where people will still do things, but they don't know how to communicate these things because nobody learned this in school. Nobody, took courses at university to be able to communicate these things. So there's a lot of qualification mechanisms for those things, right? Like that's where the greenwashing problem came in, was that people were like, hey, I think I am sustainable, so let me just throw 100% sustainable, 100% really good for the planet on these products. It created this environment of mistrust between stakeholders that now if a brand's saying I am sustainable, the first instinct of consumers is I don't trust you. What do you have to back it up? So for those people, what we've been doing is helping them communicate avoided emission scenarios by quantifying what they've done that is better than the business as usual scenario. And sometimes it isn't better, and we just have to break the bad news to them because we're just an unbiased software. A lot of the times, there is some savings or avoidance of emissions that they could communicate to their customers or their investors or even their financiers, and then be able to use it as an advantage in their business. But the jury's still out on that because the market is still pretty new.
Yeah. So how are you convincing people to work with you? Because what's your unique selling proposition, I guess?
Yeah, so our unique selling proposition is that every company who has a commitment on being able to reduce their emissions, they're all stuck in this loophole where they get a nice report out at the end of the year, but they don't know the areas where they can reduce it because, again, like some of the data that they've been using is a little bit outdated. They don't interact with their supply chains when coming up with these reports. It's what we call spend-based averages in this system. So essentially what companies do is they figure out how much money they spend on something and they multiply it with an average emission number. What that is, that emission number isn't representative of anything in your value chain. It's a very generic number. And what we allow our companies to do is not just be able to measure that number using the data they have at hand, but see the breakdown of that data. So with that breakdown of that data, you can identify that, hey, if I ask these 3 questions to my suppliers, I can get a pretty good sense of how bad this area of my supply chain is. And I can work with the supplier to counteract that in the next product that I'm going to make from the same manufacturer. And the willingness is there from the manufacturer side. It's just the ability to proactively act on these things. So the biggest pride that we take in our customers is not actually just helping them measure, it's actually helping them reduce quarter over quarter, batch over batch, year over year, and help them transition away and create more of a demand for these lower carbon materials and suppliers, and sort of like play on that supply and demand factor of economics. But it is still something that we have to make a case for because it kind of sounds a little bit too good to be true. But then once we have that trust building exercise with the client, we've seen a lot of momentum get built up and just free market economics just taking over the ability for that business to just keep that momentum going.
Okay. So let me just repeat back to you to make sure I understand. So instead of getting a blanket number at the end of the year, it's more like you can see numbers along a continuum. And if there's one that's particularly bad, you know exactly where to go and what questions to ask.
Exactly, right? Most of the companies, the best communication they could have is just with their tier 1 supplier. So your biggest supplier or your closest supplier to, where you buy it from. What our software allows you to do is see it all the way from the raw material stage and then build it up to where it gets to you. So then you can bypass all these supply chain relationships that you don't have or you've never had before, but still be able to identify
because you're not involved in those transactions.
Exactly, right? But it still gives
that makes sense. Yeah.
So it still gives that a 360-degree view of your supply chain. And then in that view, you can identify that, hey, maybe I should build a relationship with my tier 8 supplier because that is the person contributing most to my carbon emissions. So that's how essentially it can kind of make it more efficient to be able to work on those biggest high risk areas that are hidden across the supply chain.
Yeah. So who's your ideal customer? Who do you end up working with that you feel like you can make a big impact with?
So I think our ideal customer is someone who has a beloved product in the market. I'm pretty passionate about this thing because it is something that, when people demand for something they love, there's a lot of thing that goes into it. So, you could use in electronics, you could use iPhone as an example. So, people love the product so much that if that same product
people are going to continue to buy iPhones.
Exactly, right? So if the same iPhone could be 80% lower carbon footprint, it is going to help reduce so many more emissions from the economy today because of the amount of products that is sold. One of our clients is Crocs, and I'm pretty proud of their journey because, they have quite a fanatic customer base as well, as you can imagine. Not like the Apple brand, I would say. So a little bit different from the Apple crowd, but because this
different
shoe
crowd,
has been
but passionate nonetheless.
Exactly, right? So because they've been around for 40, 50 years and they've built this huge customer base that loves their product and what it does for them, if we could just help that same product be, again, 70, 80% lower carbon footprint with the current solutions available, we've just essentially eliminated so many emissions that have been accruing over the last 30, 40 years, and they're not going to accrue for the next 30, 40 years. So I think that is the kind of products that need to shift to the lower carbon mentality, and then the rest of the market will follow their suit. So that's how I see that, us convincing those people who lead a certain category in terms of the product helping them transition away, it allows the rest of the industry to follow their example.
Do you think that they're making these decisions for branding purposes? Like they know it's going to make them look really good? I mean, I'm sure that they care as well, but like what's the business selling factor there?
I think it goes company to company on what it means to them. For some companies, it may be that Europe is their fastest growing market, like you know,
And there's
and they want to be able to compete in that market with all the local alternatives. If they don't take these steps, those growth rates are at risk, right? So if the growth of your business is at risk, you need to be able to counter some of those things a lot more proactively than instead of looking at them after the fact and losing those market shares. The other thing is cost of capital. Interest rates go up and down. They've been fluctuating for a while, but essentially if you can make a case with your financier that this is directly tied to transitioning my company to a lower carbon footprint, there is a couple $1 trillion available in low cost capital for those kind of initiatives, everything from financing procurement or financing assets in your company. And all these things can be tied to you having a higher margin. When you do these things, instead of thinking about sustainability as this expensive exercise, it becomes more of an ROI exercise. Business cases. We're talking about the business cases of sustainability. So I mentioned like lower cost of capital, higher market growth rates.
Okay.
And then the last one that I was going to mention is limited supply, right? So if there is demand growing on this side, these low carbon materials and commodities isn't that consistent as like how all these traditional supply chains are. So if like, let's say you want to move away from a barrel of oil to used cooking oil in somewhere in your supply chain, barrel of oil has a very logistically proven and tested supply chain that can produce a lot, and you can kind of keep buying at a consistent rate. But if you want to be able to substitute that addiction of oil and gas, there is a limited amount of supply of these other materials, and then the faster and the earlier that you are, the more you can secure that supply for the future and build those relationships with the right suppliers of those materials instead. So I would say those are the top 3 business return cases that I can think of.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in that last point, it's like there is going to be a line of people behind you looking for that same supplier. So the earlier you get in, the more secure that relationship is.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Okay. So what are you, I have a question, then we'll transition a little bit. Like, what are you most excited about right now that you're working on?
So what we're building right now is, so we've built this technology that does measurements of products and assets. What we're tying to right now is the ability to finance and qualify lower carbon projects a lot more easier for the banking industry as well. So it's called financed emissions. And the way, again, the banks have been doing has been very qualitative, right? Like, oh, you're going to buy EVs. That kind of qualifies as your green financing. Or you're going to have an office recycling program. We'll give you some capital for that. But then being able to tie like these large amounts of like purchases that a business does. So like a company like Crocs would end up spending tens of millions of dollars on their procurement. What we're doing right now is like leveraging our current technology to allow these banks to evaluate themselves what these companies are doing and qualify them for green financing across a number of sectors. So we're actually doing a pilot around commercial real estate and then mortgages. So hopefully in the near future, if your house or your mall is lower carbon footprint than average, it should qualify for a lower mortgage or lower interest rate, but as well as the insurance you get on it should also be at a lower premium. So being able to tie down those risk factors with the bank and then reducing, again, making sustainability more affordable, flowing capital to be a lot more easier between businesses and consumers, and having all these good intent policies.
So we were talking about making it affordable for people as well as accessible.
Exactly. So everyday purchases, like, your mortgage payments, your rent, all these things should be lower for it being sustainable instead of it being higher the way it is right now. And it's just because of these disconnects between different sectors of the supply chain. And we feel like if we fix the financing side of it, then a lot more capital would be flowing with a lot more confidence, and a lot more companies would be incentivized to act faster.
And not solely relying on government regulation that may change from administration to administration, like that makes sense to me. So again, I'm repeating back to make sure I understand here. So like you would make it easy for the company to fully demonstrate to the bank what these actual things are instead of just saying, oh yeah, we did this.
Yeah, so empowering the bank in that space, just in case that business isn't as cohesive in their communication, right? So like if a business is like, hey, I want to do this sustainability program, and let's say they can't provide the numbers and they can't do all these things, allowing the bank to model these scenarios out themselves, because the finance world takes a lot of pride in creating these risk models and being able to like provide a little bit of a better rate in different scenarios by justifying things. So we just want to be able to leverage that expertise they already have to allow them to be part of this transition in the way that they're used to doing other risk factors.
Oh, I guess what I would also like to know is like, how are you finding your clients, and like what's working and what's not working as far as like the business growth of Arbor is going?
So we started about 5 years ago, and we've built quite a reputation since then. So we get a lot of our new clients through inbound. So a lot of people just find us on Google and they try our tool. We have a self-served option available with like essentially you don't have to talk to humans along the way. This makes it a lot more affordable for a lot more smaller businesses. And then we also have like enterprise packages. Most of our enterprise clients come from word of mouth marketing or through our distribution partners. So we work with a lot of consulting partners like from the Big Four or boutique consulting firms. And then they're able to help these companies interpret all this data to devise strategies, provide advisory, and then also like be able to work with them and holding like their hand along the way until they get used to it.
Very cool. So you kind of come in as a consultant and then you can transition to full partnership if they're ready, basically.
Exactly.
Sorry, I got thrown off by the by the dumb sound. All right, so I have a couple of fun rapid fire type questions for you. So do you have a particular like green product that you enjoy using that you'd recommend to listeners?
This might be a little bit self-advertising right now, but Crocs have been reducing the carbon footprint of their shoe. I know people might not like it. I never had Crocs before until they decided to reduce the carbon footprint of their shoes. So, the new Crocs shoes are being made with used cooking oil, and it's reducing the carbon footprint a lot. So, it's the same product, the same quality that people love, but a lot lower carbon footprint. That's just from like seeing in person how these things can happen, and now it is in the market. So it just makes me like wanna try it out. And then secondly, like I would say there's a few apparel brands that really don't get a lot of shout outs. So I'd give a shout out to Everlane. It's an apparel brand that I kind of really like because they really use plant-based and organic materials in their production.
Yep, I'm familiar with Everlane.
Exactly. So I just like their products and the quality of them as well as their supply chains.
Good to know. Well, they have a good reputation, but it's nice to hear that that's legit. Okay, so on your LinkedIn, you have this Alan Watts quote that says, "I have no obligation to be the person I was 5 minutes ago." Give me the details why you love that quote.
Oh, I've been self-taught my whole life. I self-taught myself engineering, and I'm always like very passionate and convicted person. So, if I draw my analysis and if I want to go act, I want to go out and act on what I think is a problem, and I want to be able to identify that problem and solve that problem. But so many times you make mistakes along the way. So many times you have lack of knowledge of what you're doing. And then being able to fail and learn is just the best way to get learnings along the way. And I feel like even if I'm so sure about a certain strategy and it didn't work out the way it should have, I feel like if I see things not working and I can kind of identify why they're not working, I don't want to live in the regret of not having to thought that I should have thought of everything possible, because everything that I've done in my life, it's impossible to think of everything, and there's always positives and negatives that come out of things. So if either I can learn anything from my own actions and my own mistakes, I'm very willing to adapt right away. But then also along the way, I meet people who inspire me, who are a lot more experienced than I am in a lot of different ways. And I want to be able to leverage their experience and their learnings as well along the way. So instead of saying my way or the highway, I like to keep an open mind. And if somebody could provide me with the facts and a good logic that is better than what I have, I'm willing to beg, borrow, and steal those things to be able to, take them and champion them as if they were my own, but still being able to, not be too discontent with my idea not being the best one.
I think it's healthy to be willing to be the dumbest person in the room, because that means you're constantly challenging yourself and surrounding yourself with people who have more experience than you, which pulls you along in your own growth. So we are on the same page there. It's like you gotta stay curious, keep learning, but also have that humility and just an acceptance of failure. It's like all you got to do is take action. And it's like if you're too worried about how smart you are or what mistakes you're going to make, that paralyzes you, and that's not useful at all. So that's why I asked. I felt like that's the same philosophy. So anyway, well, this has been so cool. It's nice to hear that the company's growing so well, that you're getting these big clients. So congratulations on your success, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us
thanks
today.
for the opportunity to come and speak about it with you. I hope I said something that gave your listeners a thing or two to think about. But yeah, I think last thing I would just like to say that climate change and solving climate change is not rocket science. And I just want to be able to allow people to think of it as an easier thing to do if they are willing to also change their mind on how businesses should be run.
I think that's so important, because it's like that same thing we just talked about. Like if you're feeling overwhelmed or like you don't have the knowledge to do it, then it's inaction again. So it's like there are simple actions that individuals can take and businesses can take, and you just need someone smarter than you to hold your hand a little bit, but it's totally doable. So yeah. Well, thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Look forward to staying connected. All right. Thanks for listening, and I apologize. We had a little bit of lag at the end of that episode, so there was a little bit of voice overlap that I couldn't quite edit to perfection. So apologize about that. But thanks again to Abdullah and all the important work that they're doing at Arbor to help companies improve their carbon footprint and operate their business more sustainably. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend or leave us a review wherever you listen. And I hope you feel empowered to make a small contribution to solving climate change issues. See you next time.